Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Now this week I have been doing the MetalHead React birthday marathon, where I've been looking back to the early 90s and looking at the heavy metal music videos that shaped and formed my taste in heavy metal music. Now obviously before the early 90s I had heard other metal bands like Black Sabbath, Dio, Judas Priest, that sort of thing. I had heard them, but it was around about the 90s when I really got into heavy metal. My older brother used to record a heavy metal TV show called Headbangers Ball off MTV when MTV used to play music. Every Sunday he'd record that show, and then throughout the week before we went to school, he'd put in his video cassette and we'd watch the music videos that came up on the show. And that's when I really started to get into heavy metal. That's when it really sort of caught my interest. And, looking at those videos, watching those videos every morning, it sort of shaped and moulded how I would proceed through my taste in metal. And today we're going to be looking at possibly the granddad, the forefather of death metal. And that could be no one else but Death. Now, Death, to me, was a very interesting band because the vocal style was interesting. And again, this is another band that seemed to concentrate very heavily on the bass guitar. I've mentioned in many of my videos previously that I love the sound of bass guitars. If you hear a really thick, dirty bass line, really sort of, it's beautiful. But with Death, their bass guitar was a lot more complex than a lot of other bands. A lot of bass guitars in metal bands at the time, they were just sort of like dum 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 dum. They were very sort of, I don't want to say basic, but they weren't overly complicated. Whereas then in came Death, and their bass lines are just unreal. And I think Human was the first album I heard by Death. Of course, introduced to me by my brother. His music collection is quite a sight to be seen. And, I used to, of a night time after school and stuff like that, I'd just sit in his room with him, just listening to metal music. And Death often made an appearance because it was just one of those bands that was just so brilliant. And, everybody that listens to heavy metal must surely know Death. They are like one of the most important bands in metal. So, yeah. So, of course, we're going to look at the track Lack of Comprehension, which, again, I'm not entirely sure, but I think this was probably the first track I heard by them. And it's one of those tracks, I've heard it many times, I've listened to Death so many times, but I've never actually looked at the lyrics for them. So this will actually be the first time I've looked at the lyrics for this track in all this time. This song came out in 1991, so, I was 11 and I'm 43 now. So in like 32 years I've not actually looked at the lyrics of this song, which is very unusual for me because I always made a habit of sitting there reading like the liner notes of CDs, which is something I still do, but not many bands actually put lyrics in the liner notes anymore. Normally it's just a piece of paper folded in half, and that sucks. And this is also why I don't like digital media, because you don't get that little booklet with the photographs and the lyrics in. But that's not what this video is about. So anyway, we'll jump into this track and have a listen, and maybe take a little trip down old memory lane. So, Lack of Comprehension by Death. I've not listened to Death in a very long time. I really need to listen to some of their music again. It's been a while. Now, I mean, what can I really say about that piece of music? It is a fantastic piece of music, and I think at the time it may well have been the most technical piece of metal I'd encountered at the time. Because there was a lot of death metal I'd encountered at the time. It was more sort of thick, chuggy, sort of, thick riffs. Whereas that one was a lot more sort of fiddly and, it was a lot more technical. And, Chuck Schuldiner was an absolute genius. He was brilliant, and his death was an incredible loss to the metal community at large. But they were such an iconic band. I don't think there is a single metalhead in the world who hasn't heard of this band. That they are just so iconic, and their brand is still thriving now today. People are still making like parodies of their shirts. I've seen death logos pop up in all various different kinds of iterations by different people, trying to adopt that style of look. And, that they are literally one of the grandfathers of metal. And, you can't deny the influence that they had on metal as a whole. Now, like I said, I've never actually looked at these lyrics before. When I listen to the song, you can pick out the odd lyric here and there, but I've never actually looked at them as a whole. Now, obviously, lack of comprehension means, an inability to understand. And there seems to be a very strong emphasis on making excuses for corrupting someone's life, whether it be ending it or, just warping them somehow. A condemning fear strikes down things they cannot understand, an excuse to cover up weaknesses that lie within. So a condemning fear strikes down things they cannot understand. These are people that immediately lash out violently against something that they don't understand, a lack of comprehension. It's like these people who violently attack, say, transgender people, because they don't understand that person, they don't understand that person's mindset, they don't understand what makes them who they are. They immediately lash out violently in order to, to destroy the threat, So it's their excuse to cover up the weaknesses within themselves. They're scared of what they don't understand, so they're going to lash out violently rather than show their weakness. Laying your guilt and pain on people that had no part in the moulding of a life that creates its destruction. So again, this is blaming someone else for the mistakes that you've made. Laying your guilt and pain on people that had no part in how your life went. They had no part in, you ruining your own life. You're just laying the blame on them because you can't take responsibility for what you've done. Right before your eyes, a reflection of the mistakes. To the end you will deny your part in the demise of a life. Lack of comprehension, thriving on your cliché, compelled by self-resentment. So, right before your eyes, a reflection of the mistakes. So, like, you see all the mistakes you've made in your life. You see every fuck up. You see every person that you've hurt or harmed in some way. You see it on a daily basis, like looking in a mirror, you see everything that you've done. But you will argue till the bitter end that it's not your fault. To the end, you will deny your part in the demise of a life. So maybe you've bullied someone, maybe like you've physically or verbally attacked someone to the point where they've ended up taking their own life. But you're not going to take on the responsibility of the fact that it was your fault. You're going to say, oh, it was them, they were miserable, yada, yada, yada. Yes, but you're the motherfucker that made them miserable. You're the person that drove them to this. But to the very bitter end, you're going to deny that it was your fault. And it's a lack of understanding about the effects that your bullying, that your words, that your actions had on that person. And it says, thriving on your cliche, compelled by self-resentment. So thriving on the cliche, it's like, oh, I didn't do anything. You know, it was all them, you know. I didn't make them do it. But you did. And the thing is, most of the people that behave like this, most of these bullies, these people that attack people out of fear and lack of understanding, it's because there's something deep inside themselves that they don't particularly like, you know, so they have to attack somebody else to make themselves feel better, to make themselves feel superior. Reaching into the minds of those that created the depression in which they... reaching into the minds of those that created the depression in which they drowned their flesh and blood. Lies. So, reaching into the minds of those that created the depression in which they drowned their flesh and blood. So, this is like trying to understand the rationale behind the people that drove, like, their family members, friends, their loved ones to do something rash and maybe take their life. You know, trying to understand, you know, why did you do what you did? Why are you okay with the fact that you did this? Why are you sitting there now blaming that person when it was all your fault? And yeah, so easy to blame the everlasting fear on a pathetic attempt to justify the ending of a life. So again, you know, it's so easy to blame the dead person. You know, it's so easy to, like, blame it on someone who can't defend themselves, and you're using that to justify what's happened rather than taking responsibility for the fact that it was your fault, the fact that you're the reason this happened. And then it goes, right before your very eyes, a reflection of the mistakes. To the end you will deny your part in the demise of a life. Lack of comprehension, thriving on your cliche, compelled by self-resentment. So actually, the song itself seems to be talking about... It seems to be talking about suicide. You know, and this is looking at it from a different perspective from every other band that I've encountered. You know, most people are talking about how the depression drove someone to it, whereas this is him going, look, it's your fault that they did this. And, you know, it's looking at the person that actually caused it rather than the actual person feeling it, which is a different take. I'd never actually looked at, like I said, never looked at these lyrics before, and it's quite interesting looking at it now. And you know, I've mentioned so many times that I like when songs have deep and interesting meanings. And if I'm reading this right, you know, I could be completely miles off base here, but from what I've read, that's what it sounds like. You know, he's sort of pointing the accusing finger at the person that drove someone else to end their life. And he's going, you realise that you're making up all these excuses for why it's not your fault. You have no understanding of what you have done to this person. So yeah, it's actually quite a deep song, and I can't believe it's taken me this long to actually look. Shut up! I can't believe it's taken me this long to actually look at the lyrics. So yeah,
you got a message.
Very interesting. Stop it! I really need to learn to turn that off when I'm doing videos. But yeah, but what more can I say about the band? You know, they are, like I say, they are like the grandfathers of one of the grandfathers of metal, you know, and possibly like the great-great-grandfathers of death metal. You know, they're an amazing band, and like I said, I don't think there's a single band in the metal genre who hasn't in some way been inspired by death. The band, that is, not the, you know. And every fan of metal must have heard of death and must have heard their music at some point in time. You know, they have such a deep rooted influence in the metal community. You know, that they are literally an essential part. Just a fantastic song, fantastic band. You know, and again, this is another one. When I first heard it, I was just like, oh, I like this. It sounds different. Because, you know, the vocal style for this, and like I said, the very technical element of the song, you know, sort of made you go, oh, this is new, this is interesting, I like this. But what else can I say? So I'll leave it at that. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm doing a marathon of videos over this week. Hopefully I'm doing 14, 2 per day. Copyrights permitting. You know, I've had an issue with a couple of videos already. I've managed to put them out, but I'm not being allowed to show the music videos, so fingers crossed we keep on in that vein. So yeah, if you liked this video, consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribe if you're not already, because that would help me out quite considerably. And yeah, I'll hopefully see you in the next video. So thank you all very, very much for watching. I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.